If you've lived in Newberg for a long time, then you might be familiar with Dr. Virginia Phillips. And if you're not familiar, then you're going to become familiar with her today. Dr. Phillips was the first Black professor at George Fox University, and her kids were the first Black students to enroll in Newberg's public schools, back when racism was much more prevalent than today. But despite the opposition and racism she faced, Dr. Phillips decided to always respond with love and forgiveness, and she continues to do that and facilitate reconciliation to this day. So Dr. Phillips has also written numerous books, and she founded Women, Men, and Youth of Purpose International. So in today's conversation, Dr. Phillips and I will discuss her life growing up, how she got to Newberg, her favorite books, and of course, how her organization is touching lives today. So this is a really special episode. I think you're really going to enjoy it. Hi, I'm Daniel Roberts. I'm a local realtor in Newberg. I'm a member of the Newberg Noon Rotary Club and an ambassador for our local Chamber of Commerce. I'm involved in quite a few things, and one of the things I really love doing is sharing stories like this. I also have the Living in Newberg YouTube channel, which is all about living in Newberg. So if you like these podcasts and enjoy learning about all the different organizations, you might also enjoy that channel because we dive into many of the other aspects of living in Newberg. But I love this town. I love helping people move here. I love helping people with real estate and helping people learn all about our amazing community. I do this podcast because I love sharing stories about the great organizations and people who make this town the great place that it is. There are so many amazing stories, and Dr. Phillips has one of those stories. So what we're going to be doing today is diving into Dr. Phillips' life, and I hope you really enjoy this conversation that we have today. Well, Dr. Phillips, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. It's so great to finally be here. We talked several months ago at the Mayor's Prayer Breakfast, and we'd met actually over a decade before that. I don't know if you remember the Serve Day from, back when I was in college.
2000.
It's 2000, not quite that long ago. It was 2000, I think 12, maybe 2011. And then we'd met again through our mutual friend, Kevin Holtzman. And then again at we all love Kevin. And then at the Mayor Prayer Breakfast. So it's so fun to kind of come full circle and finally have you on the podcast to share about your story, the ministry that you have through Women, Men, Youth, Purpose International, and all just that you've been through and your family's been through in Newberg. So I'm just going to kind of open it up to you. Well, first, just thank you for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm glad to be here in Newberg, the place that my faith became so amazing. Yeah, in Newberg.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So can you share about your life growing up, how you came to Newberg in general, your and like what that was like for you growing up, for your family growing up here, and obviously education was very important to you and your family growing up. So how that kind of ties in?
Well, if you want me to just speak about the purpose, I always say the purpose for my living. I received Christ when I was 2.5. I didn't know and understand, but something happened at that time. There was a person that God had put in my life that saw something I didn't. And that was a pretty young, 2.5. And she said, there's purpose in your life. God has called you. And I didn't understand what she meant. But my mom had spoken to me. Actually, I have another name. It's called Ophidine. I've written books on that and newspapers and all of that. They, in those days, the names meant something. Ophidine for them meant faith. And so but when I got saved, they said, you need a Christian name. So they gave me Virginia.
Okay.
And Virginia is the name that I use, but I also, when I write books, when I do radio shows and that kind of thing, I say both of them because I had articles written under Ask Ophidine.
Okay.
About families and that. But the other part of just growing up, by the time I was 3.5, I was sitting at my mom's table because she worked, and at 3.5, she had an old Bible there by the table where I used to sit, and I picked it up and started reading it. Now, lots of people didn't understand that, but I know this because you know that I am a believer in God. I believe everything he says. And so, anyway, I just started reading. I wrote my first poetry at 8 years old. So my life has been connected. That's why one of my first books was The Heart to Heart Connecting with God. There's a heart connect. And my mother had prayed for me when I was in her womb. I write about that too, because you can speak to a child in the womb and say, this is what I want my child should be. I want women to know that whatever they speak over themselves when they're pregnant, then it really children in the womb can hear at a certain time in their development. So my mother said, I want her to be educated. I want her to be educated because I want her to be able to speak to anybody on any level. Well, my mother was real educated, but that's something that she felt that she wanted her child to know. So at 5 years old, I was taking care of my 2 sisters while my mother worked. During that time, I began to really develop a real love for God. I didn't understand it all, but I knew that I had a purpose. And I believe that anybody can teach their children to have a purpose if they would just understand what that means, how important that is. So after a while, by the time I was 12, I was working and making money to help the family, my mom especially. Then my mother said to me, she said, I can't give you everything you need, so I'm going to take you to some cousins in Wisconsin. I was born in Arkansas. My mother said, I want you to be educated and I want you to be able to get along with everybody, no matter what race they were or are. And so my mother took me to a cousin's house in Wisconsin. Well, I was on my own. People thought that she had abandoned me at the age of 13. She hadn't. She had a relationship with God. And when it was time for me to leave, that's when I left. Anyway, I wanted an education so desperately that I walked around and found this Catholic school. And I asked the nuns if I can go there. And they said I would need to have some money because it was a school. It was a private school, and people from other states sent their children there because it was a special place. And it was a school where other African Americans could attend if they had the money. Okay. So at 13, I was on my own. They said, you can come. Every place I've ever been, it was for learning purposes on how to live and love. I learned at that Catholic school from a priest to appreciate classical music because he reminded me of St. Francis of Assisi, who would go out on the street and work with the poor. I learned how to look for people to help. He would go out, because in Wisconsin, in the wintertime, it's very, very cold. He would go out on the street and come back without his jacket or his galoshes. And I would say, Father Julian, what did you do? He said, I saw someone on the sidewalk that needed them worse than I did. He taught me how to give. And so, but I couldn't afford, the school, so I cleaned up. The nuns and the priests let me clean up the place, and that took care of my room and board. But then there began my first. I went out and put my age up to 16, and I got a job in a Jewish dress shop with models, real models. And I would run after school and clean up there for my room and board and go to work there in that place. I was 16 by then. And the people that I met in the alteration room who made the dresses for the models, they were actual models. They would wait for me to run in from the school, go downstairs, and then they would have some sandwiches waiting for me. I learned how to dress through those models and the models. So every place that I've ever gone has been on purpose for the purpose of learning how to relate to people, all kinds of people. I was the first African-American to work in the telephone company, which was across the street from this place too. Then, because I graduated with a 94.9 average. And I got a scholarship to Cardinal Stritch University. I was the first Black on there too. And I was lonely. I wanted a family. So I prayed for a family desperately. And I met a young lady who said, "Okay, she would room with me." And so she became my roommate. She lived in a place called Waukesha, Wisconsin. There was only one Black family at that Waukesha, Wisconsin. She said, and she lived next door to them.
Oh, wow.
And she said, "I want you to meet them. I want you to meet my friends." And I was really lonely because I needed a family. I always had this longing for a family. And so she introduced me. And I went over to their home. And they were the only Black family there, but they intermarried. So I met my first husband there. Actually, I didn't know he was going to be my husband, but he was my friend. And my friend, whose name was Darlene, I was just getting ready to go into the convent because I wanted a family so badly. She said, "I want you to meet this family." And I did. Because my first husband went into service. He was in the Marine Corps. He joined the Marine Corps. That's where he met his Black people. And then when he came back, to make a long story short, he said, "You're so green." I really didn't have any. I didn't have a boyfriend. I was so busy trying to study and get on with my life. He kind of followed me around. He said, "You're just green. You don't know anything." And I said, "Okay, well, you can come home and meet my mother." And I met his mother. I met his brothers. There were 5 boys, and he was the eldest, and he was back home from service. So when I met him, I thought, I don't know if I really want to get married. I have to have an education. My mother told me. But it was really amazing how God brought me from the school. From when I received Christ, it was in a Baptist church. Then he sent me to a Catholic church, and that's why reconciliation, and that's why God had me ministering. I have ministered in every denomination except the Mormons, and their ladies came to some of our meetings of when God gave me this ministry of reconciliation. Reconciliation, it really was born in my heart because from the time I really went to that Catholic school, and I saw that I was the only one in this job, and then I was the only one in this job with the telephone company. I knew that I had purpose. Something in me said, well, there must be something God wants to do with me. When my youngest son was 5 years old, I went back to school. I was the first one in education at Sonoma State University. I went back to school after I married, and I went to Sonoma State, and there is where I was hired in education. That was in the university there, and then I used to go to California, and I got a job with the Knights of Columbus.
Okay.
After that, what happened was, every place I went, I seemed to be the only one.
And by the only one,
Only black.
that was a black person. Okay.
So it wasn't like I was surprised when God sent me to Newberg. I had experienced that before. But this is what was so amazing to me. My children, you see, I in my first marriage, my first husband died at the age of 38 and left me with 8 kids.
Wow.
People used to ask me, "You must be a good Catholic." I said, "I'm a Christian." Anyway, I went. I got a job, and I moved from California, where I started schools for the youth. And I worked in California with other universities. And so at Sonoma State was the first time that I looked at having other African American students go to Africa. So I wrote a proposal and sent 15 students to Africa.
Wow. And for what?
I wanted them to understand what their culture was about, because they weren't getting it. And so I think I'm skipping over a little thing, and a few things, but this is what 3 things I want to really have the audience recognize. Everybody's born with purpose. They just need to know what it is. It didn't take me long to know my purpose was to be reconciled to everybody, any race, any religion. I learned that because I was so curious about different things. I wanted to know who I could talk to. I wanted to talk to anybody, no matter what level they were on. I won't go into all the details because it's too long, but this is the thing. When I came to Newberg, God sent me to Portland first. And I went to Portland, and there was only 1% African American then. And this is what happened. I was asked to teach at Portland State University, and I was in a program that I ministered to 238 students who were in different places in their lives. And so I said, okay, I'll take the job at Portland State. I prayed and prayed, and he sent me to Newberg. And I'm thinking, I'm looking for this place. At first, I saw the sign Sherwood because my eldest son said, "Mom, we need to be in a smaller town because this town is too big and blah, blah, and went into this. So we looked around, found Sherwood first,
Mm-hmm.
and we integrated that community where we lived. The only reason we could get a house there was because this lady had foster children, and the foster children. This was a unique place. They didn't like it because she had foster kids. Not any of them were black either, but they didn't like it. So when she sold the house to me, they were delighted. They thought that these black people are moving in here. We were the only ones. And that's the only reason she sold it, to get back at the neighbors. She thought if the neighbors had a black family in this place, then it would satisfy her, because they didn't like all those foster kids.
So
She had.
They didn't like her living there because they had foster kids. So
Yeah,
her way of getting back by selling.
sell me the house. When I got into that, we didn't even know the house was for sale. So we saw a sign down at this beautiful place down at the end of the road, and where you drive. Anyway, my son and I just drove up and said, let's go up there and see what that's about. I got there, went into the house, walked down it was an 8-bedroom house, and I had 8 children, and actually 9, because we always had kids, somebody coming to live with us.
Mm-hmm.
So we brought this boy whose parents didn't want him, so he came with us, and he became. Anyway, when we got to the end of the first stairs, I heard the Lord said, "This is my home. You will stay here." That home became a home for people who didn't have a place to live. That was when we started the ministry of reconciliation, restoration, and renewal.
Now, that's not the same home that Kevin bought from you, is it?
Yes, it is.
Is that one on Markhaven?
Yeah. One on Markhaven. I said, well, my daughter wanted me to move to Florida to be with them. And I said, I asked the Lord, because I had been there at the Sherwood house all those years. And I asked him, I said, would you send somebody here that has your heart? It was Kevin. Kevin knocked on the door after because I was looking to sell the house, and so, because God had said to move on. Anyway, he was a real estate man.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
I worked with him. Yeah.
And so.
Well, and we can maybe get to that, but I think we could easily talk for about 3 hours on all of this stuff.
I know.
We had to condense it a little bit. So it is a very interesting story with Kevin, but I did want to talk about, because we have a few things to talk about. One, so when your family came to Newberg, is that all right if we...
Yeah. Whatever, yeah.
Okay. So when your family came to Newberg, I mean, you just gave a very clear example of the racism you faced. And your kids were some of the very first in
they were
right, the very first. Okay. So what was that like, being the first Black family? I mean, I'm sure that was not easy.
No, it was very difficult. As a matter of fact, my children were really, they had a hard time, except the boys. Those girls got interested in the boys, but the girls weren't treated very well. I have one daughter. Because my first husband was part Sioux and Blackfoot. Okay, so his complexion was different. But I have one girl whose complexion is like mine, and so the rest of them, she had the hardest time. It was difficult for them. I had to go to the school and explain to the teachers that my children, as a matter of fact, we fasted and prayed And on Wednesdays, the teachers didn't understand why they fasted.
Mm-hmm.
So that gave me an entryway into Newberg School to explain what the differences were, but how they should be treated. It was very difficult for us, but the children would come home and we would pray, and that kept them. We had family meetings. So many of the books I wrote were on the family.
Yeah.
From the womb on up. So my children suffered because they even had a general assembly to say there were black people coming to the school.
Mm-hmm.
There had never been there. And after that, in Newberg, there's the Jaquith family.
Mm-hmm.
All right. The Jaquith family became part of the family. Wherever we went, I looked for a family.
Mm-hmm.
And the Jaquith family received us. And from then on, we are still family members. As a matter of fact, in Newberg, we would walk into a place and this family, their children would run up to my husband, Joshua, because I was married a second time. And this man was a miracle man. He said, I will not be a stepfather to your children. I will be their father. And this man changed so many men's lives because I don't know if I want to go through that. You want to know about Newberg. But in Newberg, we started the first counseling center in Newberg. Many things. With the state of Oregon, we were the ones that started the adoption, interracial adoption.
Oh, wow.
And so there were many things that happened because we just said, God loves the family and he loves diversity. And so we taught our children to love. And even though they were weren't treated well, they learned that to be friends with anybody of any race is because of a God that loved family. So even many of my books, it's on family from birth on.
Yeah.
And so that's how we got to Newberg. And one of the things that really blessed my heart was this, because I pray about everything. And while I was praying, I was told, you are a bridge builder. You should lie down and let people walk over to the other side. And that's what reconciliation is.
It's people walking all over you.
Yeah. But they were walking to the other side. And when he said walk to the other side, that meant they walked from prejudice to understanding of God's will for mankind.
Wow.
That's what I taught.
You also taught at George Fox University.
Yes.
And were you the first Black professor?
Yes. And as a matter of fact, I was denied at first because they said the director, education director, said, why did you come here? And I said, because I wanted to teach here. And he said, well, we don't have enough money to pay. You have 8 kids? He said, what does that have to do with my teaching ability? Because by that time, I had 2 doctorates.
Mm-hmm.
And so finally, what happened was, it was amazing. His son became ill, and I went back a second time. And I said, I'll pray for your son. I got the job.
Wow.
It was amazing because he said they didn't have enough to pay for a teacher with 8 kids. Now, I was not only the first teacher but this is what happened. I had 27 students. None of them were black. None of them had really had an opportunity to interrelate to with black people. So this is what happened. Their assignment was this: they had to go live, go stay as part of their grade with a black family. But I was attending Maranatha Church in Portland then, where I started a school there for children and lots of other things. But anyway, and I work with Warner Pacific as well. But this is the thing. All of them said okay, except two families said they're not going into Portland. But that's where I wrote the book. Of course you fit in. So I said to my students, if you will go for a weekend and spend time with a black family to get to know them. I chose one of the greatest black families I could find. They allowed them to come in, and my students, there were 27 of them. 2 of them couldn't go because their parents said, no, you can't go into the NSA. But they stayed with those families, and they wrote their experiences.
Mm-hmm.
It was a great thing to happen because Maranatha was a church where they worshiped, and it was one of the first churches that was an integrated church. So not only did my students go there, that's during the hippie movement, and the hippies would come, they get saved right there. So it was an amazing thing that happened. So afterwards, they would have to write their experiences. That was part of their grade.
Yeah.
And after they wrote, everybody, their lives changed because they lived with not only people who were educated, but they were people who loved the Lord. And so that was a great experience for them. And so the book, of course, if it in, will probably be will be printed in 2 months.
Okay. And by the way, if people are interested in learning more about your books or your story, where can they go to find that information?
That information is on our, should be on our website. They can just write. Newberg is still where we write our newsletters and everything. They can order them. They can order them from by.
So on your website, which I'll have that link.
Yeah, you'll have that link.
Description.
They can order it because we have by the way, there are so many people who change their impression of African Americans because I visited 14 countries, and 11 of them were in Africa. And the universities that I taught at, we did an exchange program. So we sent some of the students over there.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a great experience for them. We brought back, is it time?
Oh, you can finish that and then I'll go into the next question. Sorry, I'm giving signal, I'm sure, subconsciously. Well, the thing is, I'm fascinated by all this, and I know our listeners are, I'm sure would love to learn more, and I have to cram all this into the next about 15 minutes of what we would love to talk about. So, So first thing, if you're listening, definitely check out the website. I have the link in the description. And that kind of is a segue into the ministry, which is Women, Youth of Purpose International. So can you give a brief description of what that is and how that got started?
In my travels, I've traveled to 14 countries, 35 states in the U.S. And the one I want to tell you about that got me to this place. We were talking about, there was a situation, something we were saying.
With the ministry of women, men,
Oh,
purpose
okay.
international.
I was sent to Ohio because our ministries were such that we needed grants.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't realize this, but the director of services for the state of Oregon was a friend of mine. She recommended me for a job in Michigan. They were searching for someone for this 75-year-old agency. They only had one black person and 60 employees. And those, in Battle Creek, there were little towns where there were African Americans. I was so tired because we were running 6 programs. And so my husband knew I was tired. And one day I went to my desk and I said, God, I'm tired. What should I do? And I read a letter. I had received a letter stating, would you come for an interview? In Michigan. And never left my family. What could I do? So we prayed about it. To make a long story short, I ended up as the director of a 75-year-old agency. They had only had one black person to work there. And they had interviewed 89 people, and 5 were black, and I was one of those whites. Now, how did I didn't even know about this. Turns out that the woman who recommended me was a woman from who used to be a director in Salem. And so she gave him my name. I didn't know that. So they asked me if I'd come for an interview. And I said, my husband said, well, we need some more money for these programs. And so maybe you can get some money because Kellogg Foundation had given them funds for this particular program, Family and Children's Services. So I got there. I was the third one interviewed, and they asked me when I could come back. So that was one of the loneliest times of my life. I had never left my family, but my husband said, "This must be God." So I went. And they said, "Can you at least stay a couple of years?" I said, I can't stay away from my family. And they said, "Can you at least stay a couple of years?" They got 6 things to do. I finished them in 1 year and went home.
Wow.
But during that time, what happened was that Children and Family Services, that 75-year-old agency that had not really gone into the black community, connected. And so it was time for me to return. And that was one of the best things that could have happened to me, because when I returned, God gave me the program, reconciliation, and I knew that I would be teaching in schools that God had me start, but more than that, I have taught in every denomination.
So the ministry organization, Women, Men, Youth of Purpose International, what does that actually do? How does that help people?
This is how it happens. Reconciliation is something we live. Okay. So I started groups, first with women, how to rear your children, how to take care of your husband, all of that. So reconciliation is so on God's heart. That's what I did. I taught what I learned through all the experiences God had given me for families. Most of my books are about family, about family meetings, how you train your children, what do you, in every aspect of the family. I've written a book. And so when I returned from Michigan, I wrote the proposal for Women of Purpose International. And when I knew that I was supposed to write about the family, I wrote, and that's how it started.
Yeah.
We just started having large conferences for people to get together.
Okay. And over time, it went from Women of Purpose to including the whole family?
Including the whole family, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, and I know we're, again, I wish we could talk for several hours about this. But so you did that ministry here for how long?
Well, it's still going.
Well, and I guess the reason I say for how long, because you, without getting too much into it, you left and then came back. So you left for a season, you're now back.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe a better question is, how long has it been going on at this point? And then what are you doing now that you're
okay? It's been going on since 1976. And what we're doing now is what we have taught all these years. We have people who are in charge, like in some of the states in the U.S., we have Women, Men, and Youth of Purpose. We have a director. And so at this time, since the pandemic, we have opened up what we call God's houses. And in God's houses, we teach them how to have family meetings and not to fear. I taught not to fear when the pandemic came, and how it's all connected to God's purpose for us to be together as people.
Yeah. And so what are you doing now? Because I don't see you as the kind of person who would retire or just
well, we're planning
take the hands off.
We're planning to go to Belize.
Okay.
Yeah. And my next thing is to just get people. My administrator for 20 years, we have the names of people in the ministry, and wherever they are, they get newsletters every prayer. We have a prayer-a-thon. We have a prayer director. We have prayer directors that pray for people. And so they receive what's going on. And one of the things, some people ask us, well, what are you doing now since the pandemic? We're teaching people what they have learned to use it in their homes, to love.
Yeah. You've also written, you've mentioned several of them. You've written, how many books have you written?
Actually, I've written nearly 40. Nearly
40 books.
Yeah.
Do you find that there's one or two books that you constantly are recommending to people?
Yes. The books that the two books that I recommend is Kingdom Culture. It's a book on impartation, using your God-given gifts to help others. That book is, and then Born to Love. It's a book about what has happened.
Mm-hmm.
And Born to Love will be on Amazon in a couple of months.
Okay. And then in addition to Of Course You Fit In, you mentioned, right?
Yeah, Of Course You Fit In.
Okay. Or what? Yeah. So Of Course You Fit In, and then Born to Love.
Yeah, Born to Love. Yeah. Kingdom Culture. But I started out with this book on 12 Keys to Connecting to the Heart of God. I first start out with connecting to the heart of God, then the rest of it will happen.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, again, this is, I feel like we are just scratching the surface of what Women, Men of Youth Purpose International is. I want to say, just from a very personal level, I appreciate you and all the work that you've done. Obviously, we weren't able to get into all of it, but I think it's important for people to have somewhat of an understanding of, with reconciliation and there's a sense of discomfort. As many white people, we often wonder, well, what can we do? Like how there's kind of this, we feel awkward a lot of times. Like we don't know what to do to reconcile or reach out. But knowing that there's still a lot of work to be done. So what advice would you give to the people of Newberg as we grapple with a lot of these things? We don't have a huge Black population, but there are many people of all kinds of races. So what advice do you give?
My advice is this. We have people in Newberg who want reconciliation. It's been visited. It's there. In 2000, we had the Unity Conference where churches, mayor, everybody, we got together. And that is one of the reasons I'm so glad to be back at this time, because this mayor had prayer. And I have friends who pray with him and pray for this town. Now, this town has a stamp on it. And that stamp is, God is saying, I want to unify in love. And it's written. It's how it can be done, what's to do it. And can I call some names? Well,
I think, it depends on what you're calling them about.
This young lady who brought me here, her family has been such an influence on me. And if it's all right, I'd like to say that she has just blessed. Whenever she prays, it's like she's at the heart of God. And that is what she does with other people. Lisa Venable is her name. And she doesn't want to be, but she's, when she prays, it's like, okay, I'm in this with God all the way. But they're the Jaquith family. They're my family. And the Jaquith family, they just had a meeting of their family. And it's actually a beautiful family that has gone through a lot. But the Jaquiths, they are like, we could have been born in each other's family. In Newberg, God wants to complete what he's already done. What he's done is he sent African Americans into a place where they weren't. Then he put people who are different races together, and he showed them how to love. That's kind of like what would I call it? I would call it a combination of love and obedience. There are people here ready for that, and they're willing to give it away. I know that we don't have much time, but this is the thing. Everybody can understand how to love, how to be in a family that's different from them, if they have God's heart. And no matter where I go, they ask me, well, why do you say this or that? If you ask for God's heart, he will give it to you. He's love. And there's nobody, I can say this for a truth, that I cannot love. Even if I have enemies, and I don't know if I have any. I probably do. But anyway, I believe that once you know God, he is love, and he'll give his love away to you to give to others. So now the next step that we're taking is this. We've got to live it. We say we love the Lord. We read his word. He is saying now, a sinner will look at you, and if they don't know you, but if they look at you and you live love, they're more apt to understand it's okay.
Yeah.
And how do they get to it? But but you have to live what you teach.
I think that's a big thing right there is I think we've spent too much time, by we, I just mean, Christians, because there's people listening to this podcast who are Christians and have probably had experiences with people who don't live what they say, and there's the very hypocritical background within many churches and Christians. We all are working through that, but I think loving people despite disagreements, despite racial differences, despite political differences, is something that we really all need to work on. And I don't know what to say to the people who are listening who may not believe in God. As I guess you can interpret all this however you want. But yeah, I think you make really good points on that. And I wish we could go on. I keep saying that. So for people to get involved with, to learn more, to get involved, they can go to your website. I'll have that linked in the description. And can they get your newsletter there too?
Yes, they can get the newsletter once a month. The other thing too is we still have a post office box in Newberg.
Okay.
Yeah. So the post office box, you can send it.
With a mailing address. I can have for people who'd like to send letters or emails, I can have that information as well.
Yeah.
And the one last question that I like to ask people, and you kind of already touched on this, but what gives you hope for the future of Newberg?
You have prayer on the courthouse steps.
I'm actually not familiar with it, if we may, but
well,
I'm sure there's prayer somewhere.
Yeah. I would just like to ask Lisa if tell where the prayer is.
Yeah. So Lisa drove Dr. Phillips here. She's been sitting quietly in the background. You can go to the mic, Lisa, and share. Just come over here.
The prayer that you have on the courthouse step.
Well, we have prayer every Saturday. We do prayer walks and we meet in different places all around the city. So we've been praying for the city for a number of years. Just walking the streets and praying. And then about once a month, we meet in front of City Hall and pray.
And how can people find more information out about that?
Email newbergprayerteam@gmail.com.
newbergprayerteam@gmail.com.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, and you have the address of the Newberg. I have to remember a lot of things. When people ask me, I get at least 300 calls, and so I'm thinking, now that I'm a senior citizen, it's hard to remember all those things, but I have it written down so I can always look at that. But yeah, Newberg is where you can send for information.
Okay.
And also I'll send you the rest of it.
So what gives you hope for the future of Newberg is that we have prayer.
The hope for Newberg is this, that yes, not only prayer, pray for your mayor, because I believe that this is a man that prays. And your leaders, I think that there's a difference here now in some of your leaders, and I met them some more, and I still know a lot of the people in Newberg. So not only prayer, but really, I'm not saying test God really, but I'm saying this, which probably can be taken as testing. If you don't believe in God, just don't carry it around in your mind. Why don't you ask Him whether or not you're living a life that's full of hope. And really, I have experience with knowing God. He never leaves me broke, even though I'm not at a university now. But he has kept me and all my children. He's not a respecter of persons. He's a lover of person. I would say at this end, try God.
Try God. Love it. Well, thank you, Dr. Phillips, so much. Thank you for your time. And I encourage everyone who is interested in learning more to check out the website. I'll have that, again, linked in the description. And you can reach out to me if you have questions. But thank you again for your time, Dr. Phillips. It's been a pleasure having you today.
Thank you, too. I enjoyed meeting you. I think this is a wonderful thing to do. And people need to hear, don't ever be afraid. That's the one thing I'll leave. Don't ever be afraid to name the name of God and ask him questions, because he's a person.
Great way to end. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the Giving Town podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider sharing it with a friend who you think might benefit from hearing it. While more and more people are continuing to hear about this podcast, I still need your help to spread the message about all the people and organizations that make Newberg so great. Well, thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you in the next episode.